If you were here and you were able to see the program, the cover is in tribute to the gentleman who started this annual ceremony 47 years. His name was Halbert Litchfield. To many of us here, he was a president of the fire department, a neighbor, a friend, and the chaplain of the fire department, the City of Laurel, the police department, the Prince George County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, just to name a few. Today we miss him. For me, it's personal. I've known him since I was 4 years old. He was a mentor who lived across the street from my mother and father's house, which is less than a couple hundred yards from where we stand. As small kids, we grew up on a street with Halbert Litchfield, who always kept a watchful eye and was never shy about disciplining you. And as we grew up, he became a mentor. His sister Ann lived next door to us, directly across the street from Halbert. His father was the first city building inspector in the history of the city. And by way of just a small tidbit, he never drove a car. He walked to every construction site with his walking cane and always one of his colleagues walking with him throughout the city. Over the years, Halbert became a minister and then ultimately the chaplain to many, many organizations. But more importantly, he was the voice of compassion and was a man who mentored many, many young people in this city through the years. This time last year, just before this ceremony started, Halbert missed his first reason to be here in a cemetery that he personally took as a challenge when it had become run down and not very well taken care of, and became the president of the Ivy Hill Association. And when this beautiful cemetery was finally reconstructed, this great ceremony began. Today I have the pleasure of introducing another friend who I've known since our teenage years. He is now the chaplain of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department. He is a veteran of the United States Army, serving his time in Vietnam. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce to you Jim Collins, chaplain of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department.
Thank you, Bobby Joe. This has been a very difficult year, to say the least. First of all, when the president asked me to be the chaplain, it's a very difficult thing to do because I'm so used to Halbert Litchfield, the Reverend. He was compassionate. He showed up. If you're in the hospital, you received cards with letters wishing you the best. He'd come by and see you. This was a man who was compassionate to people. He didn't care who you were, where you're from, or anything else. He was always there for you. We'll talk more about Halbert as we get into the program. Right now, I'd ask you to, for the invocation, to say the prayer. Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we gather here today to pay tribute to our members who have passed before us, members who sacrifice their time so others may live, members that we hold dearly in our hearts. For this, dear God, we ask you to hold them in the hollow of thy hands. We ask that you provide the knowledge and guidance to all members who carry on this tradition and return them home safely. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Order! Home!
At this time, I welcome you in your homes, excuse me, and those people here with us today to join with us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Home!
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order! Home!
As our honor guard leaves, I again take great pleasure in the remembrance of deceased members from the organizations represented here today, presented by Chaplain Jim Collins.
I thank God for allowing us to have this memorial service today with everything that's going on in this world. And we hope that God himself will make this virus disappear, find a cure, do some way. Right now, the person who passed away within the last year was June 6th, was our chaplain, Warren Halbert Litchfield. I met the man in 1972 when I joined the Laurel Fire Department. He was then the president. He ran a tight meeting, but he was fair to everybody. Warren Litchfield passed away at the age of 90 on June 6, 2019. He was the son of Joseph Edgar Litchfield and Margaret Atchison. His wife, Mabel, passed away in 2014. His son, David, is a member of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department. And he has numerous relatives from the Peters, Lim Peters, his great uncle Matthew Cruz, and grandchildren. He was loved his family. Warren lived his entire life in Laurel, the rest of the time he served in the Army during the Korean War. After returning from the war, Warren worked with his father in the construction business a few years before taking a job at Fort George G. Meade that lasted for 31 years. He was a member of the United Methodist Church. Warren devoted his life to serving others. He became a member of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department in 1957 and held positions of secretary, first and second vice president, president, and became the chaplain when the position was established in 1981. He chaired many committees, became the chief emeritus chaplain of the Prince George's County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, as well as chaplain to the Laurel Police Department and the City of Laurel. Warren was an active member of the Knights of Pythias in Laurel. He served many years as president to the Ivy Hill Association, working many hours to preserve the cemetery that had, as Bobby Joe said before, deteriorated, making sure the cemetery would be in perpetual care. We have a lot of memories of our chaplain. It was a very difficult task to even try to stand up here and speak, and I know he's watching me because he's laid to rest off to my left. But he'll always be in our hearts for now and forever. His memory will live on. And as a chaplain, I'm going to even try to be a fraction of what that man was. Again, thank you so much, and I'm sure there'll be more people to talk about the chaplain as the day goes on. Thank you.
As you can see, we have some unique experiences putting this program on today, but I can assure you that we're doing all that we possibly can do to remain masked, to stay the proper distance. At this time, one gentleman I would like to introduce that joins us here today, retired member of the United States Navy, and the president of the Laurel City Council, Councilman Signor. Our first speaker doesn't need any introduction, but I will embarrass him as I do every year and say that our mayor, Craig Moe, has had a life committed to community service. He too, as several of us up here, are members of either the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department or the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad. Craig has been the president and an officer of the fire department long before he entered politics. He was active. And in a time, he was riding on ambulances and fire trucks serving the Silver Spring area of Montgomery County. He's been our mayor, and as all mayors know, there are times within your community you have to make tough decisions. And so this is a guy who's not afraid to do that. He keeps everyone on their toes, and he has done a magnificent job leading the city for many years as both a councilman and a mayor. It is not only an honor to introduce the mayor, but also a dear and close friend who, in any personal tragedy that I've experienced in my adult life, one of the first people that I would call would be Craig. And the person I called before him was a guy named Halbert Litchfield. Your Honor, the podium's all yours.
All yours.
Good morning. I want to acknowledge and I want to thank our Council President Keith Sidnor, who's here with us today, and appreciate his service to our country and the work that he does. You know, we've had a lot of tough decisions to make, and Councilman Sidnor, our Council President, been right there with us, working with us and helping make those decisions. Keith, thank you again for what you're doing. Good morning. On behalf of the Mayor and City Council, I bring you greetings, and I say thank you for tuning in to be with us at our annual joint Memorial Day service in historic Ivy Hill Cemetery. As the City of Laurel celebrates 150 years of service to the city and to our community, I'm honored to be with you this morning to honor and remember all that have gone before us. Memorial Day is observed on the last Monday of May. It is formerly known as Decoration Day and commemorates all men and women who have given their lives in military service to our nation. Many people visit cemeteries, memorials, and they'll be outside having cookouts on Memorial Day. It is traditionally seen as the start of the summer season. But on this Memorial Day, we come together virtually. Our gathering is small this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are all here representing our organizations to honor the men and women in uniform and to those who have given their lives in service to our nation. And we're here to recognize Laurel's hometown heroes, from the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department, the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad, the Laurel Police Department, and the American Legion Post 60. This year, I would like to acknowledge and say thank you to our doctors and nurses, as well as all of those medical support staff working with our first responders on the front lines of this public health emergency. We thank you, and we're praying for you as we all work together to keep our residents safe and to flatten the curve on the spread of this deadly virus. As we have done year after year, we recognize and we pray for the safe return of our brave men and women in uniform who are working in different locations around the world. As we remember those in uniform serving in all branches of our military, let us not forget those in uniform in our community, protecting us 24/7, 365 days a year. Our public safety agencies, the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department, the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad, the Laurel Police Department. Thank you for your service, your commitment, and your dedication to the community we all love, Laurel. Each of you who protect our community daily are Laurel's hometown heroes. We know in the past several months that you have gone above and beyond the call of duty. Each of you are special to our community. We want you to please stay safe and keep up the great work you're doing. Let me also remind you to pray for the families of the fallen and for those that continue to serve around the world and in our community. Pray not just today, but all year long. Let me finish my remarks with a poem that I found years ago, which I call Remembering. The author is unknown. These words are dedicated to all that have lost a loved one. The ones we love remain with us. The love itself lives on, and cherished memories do not fade because a loved one's gone. The ones we love can never be more than a thought apart, and as long as there is memory, they'll live on in our heart. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and being with us. I want to thank our communications department and all of the organizations here this morning. So again, thank you all very much, and please be safe.
So as the mayor clearly pointed out, these are different times and different places. Later in this program, I've always been charged with the responsibility for closing remarks, but I am going to slip a few in here ahead of time because I think it's an important time in the history of this country that for the first time, we're asking all of you to be volunteers because everyone needs help. Everybody out here needs help. Here we honor the people that sacrifice day in and day out and those that make the ultimate sacrifice. And while, as the mayor says, this is traditionally the beginning of summer, we talk about beaches and picnics. When this service began, it was to honor those who gave their life for their country. And yet, that ultimate sacrifice was backed up by many, many human beings sacrificing to keep this country free and open and honest to one another. In these tough times, there are tough decisions by people that are on these streets every day. It's no exception to the members of the Laurel Police Department. Without a doubt, and from my own personal knowledge, this is the finest municipal police department that you will find anywhere in the country. I'm equally proud to say I have a son who's now been an officer in this department for 15 years. So in these times where we worry about family, I ask you to worry about not just my son, but all these people that are out here daily taking care of all of us. And it's a pleasure to introduce our chief for comments, who served 36 years in the Montgomery County Police Department, rising to the rank of Deputy Chief of Montgomery County for 36 years. And we now are very fortunate to have him as the chief of our police department. Please welcome Chief Russell Hamill.
Thank you, Mr. DePietro. Every Memorial Day I think about our veterans, family members of mine who served at the beaches in Normandy and in the prior war in France in World War I and the Civil War. And it is a stark reminder for me, as I hope for all of us, a day like this, to remember and give thanks. So I want to thank you all for allowing us the opportunity. My officers are doing traffic detail out in front of here and doing guard on our memorial here in the cemetery. I want to thank you for allowing us to participate in this solemn ceremony, recognizing our fallen service members who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our benefit and the benefit of future Americans yet unborn. People they never even knew, of course, and they would never even probably thought about. Today, we often hear people expound about their rights and their freedoms. Often, they don't understand, or they have no understanding, where such things come from, how they are so blessed with these liberties. We are reminded that our rights and our freedoms are not just given to us, they are not a foregone conclusion automatically gifted from prior generations. They are won and they are preserved through the bravery and sacrifice of those that came before us and those that walk amongst us. From Valley Forge to the battlefields of the War of 1812, where our national anthem was written in a harbor right up the road here as a siege laid to the city from foreign invaders. From the Alamo to Gettysburg and Appomattox. From San Juan Hill to Belleau Wood and Chateau Thierry. From Normandy to Bastogne and into Germany. From the biting winter in Korea and the sweltering heat of the jungles of Vietnam. To the battles of Desert Storm and enduring freedom in Iraq and Afghanistan. The American soldier has paid the price for our freedoms with his and her blood and limbs and their lives. They understood and they understand the sacrifice it takes to preserve freedom. That's not just a word or part of a phrase to be thrown about at a ball game or a cookout. That is the foundation of who we are as Americans. And that foundation stands upon the men and women buried here and in cemeteries across our country, and indeed on foreign soil. Brave men and women who died to preserve and protect something worth dying for. Us, our freedom, in this great country. So I ask you to please take a moment to look at these glorious flags surrounding us all through this cemetery, on this hallowed ground. And remember that below that flag is an American soldier who lived and died that we may live under this blanket of freedom. And before you go to bed tonight, please say a prayer for that soldier and his or her family, their loved ones. And in that prayer, ask the Almighty to provide for that soldier as he or she provided for us in our hour of need. Thank you, and please God bless our fallen soldiers.
Thank you, Chief. That was the origin. The origin of this great ceremony was to remember those who defend the rights and freedoms to protect this country throughout generation to generation, from century to century. Our next speaker today is a gentleman I've known for a good part of my older adult life, a thing that happens to all of us, because I think all of us at one time or another think we'll never achieve the age of our parents, and now we are the parents and the grandparents. But this gentleman I knew, ribbed him terribly. I think he came from Pittsburgh. I don't remind him that very often. He became a member of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department 44 years ago. And I will embarrass him as well. He came here because he was employed as part of the Department of Defense. He was a great guy. He's been a good friend to many, many, many members of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department. And on a night, as I sat in the council chambers during a meeting, a phone rang, and we picked immediately up and heard that there had been an accident on the fire ground, Laurel Volunteer Fire Department. The now president of our fire department, Victor Whipple, was seriously injured in that accident as a volunteer, giving back to his new community in Laurel, and he has not stopped. He currently serves as the president of the fire department, and in September he will take the reins of being the president of the Prince George County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association. It's a great pleasure to introduce a friend and a great young man by the name of Victor Whipple, President of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department.
Thank you, Bobby Joe. Good morning. Well, this is certainly a very different Memorial event for us, but much like the military shortly after 9/11, who took on a very different global role on a very different front lines, our first responders just a few months ago took on a very different role on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. First responders across the city of Laurel and around the world are daily exposed to this potentially deadly virus. COVID-19 is a very different enemy for us, much like the global war on terrorism presents to our military. Today, we honor those veterans, the men and women of our military that have paid that ultimate sacrifice in defense of our nation. They and their families should never be forgotten as we remember them this Memorial Day. As a nation, our busy lives sometimes distract us from taking a pause to remember critically important milestones in our rich history. Today, without a doubt, is meant to remember some of those milestones and the human sacrifices made to keep our country strong. There's an appropriate quote for today from the great General George S. Patton. "It is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God such men lived." We're also humbled today as a group to represent the local first responder agencies and pledge to stay on the job regardless of how long this virus is around, in service for others. Our members have been on the front lines from the start, but of course, they've always been at the front. We run into buildings as others run out. We climb inside vehicles to extricate critically injured occupants. We face dangerous perpetrators on the wrong side of the law. We perform house calls to check on the sick and help them up when they've fallen. And yes, we occasionally do get cats out of trees even though they don't need our help. I'll close with a special tribute to our beloved late chaplain emeritus, Warren Hulbert Litchfield. As you've already heard, Hulbert started this memorial service many years ago. He was a proud veteran of the Korean War, a loving husband and father. He was a special man in so many ways and touched so many hearts. We sorely miss him, and he will always be part of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department family. Well, I don't think Hulbert was a regular on Facebook. I'm quite sure he's overseeing this ceremony from above, just as he did for so many years with us here. Thank you.
Our next speaker is one of the reasons why our Laurel Volunteer Fire Department is so successful, because she represents a part of the fire department that is critical to its day-to-day operation. For 46 years as a member and as the president of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department Auxiliary, it is my pleasure to introduce Rosa Mayer.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department Auxiliary. With this being an extraordinary time dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, these past few months has been and continues to be very challenging for everyone, especially older adults and people with underlying health conditions who are the most at risk for COVID-19. But we would like you to know your local volunteer fire department is here to help, as we have been since the beginning. Let us take a moment to remember and honor the brave men and women who made the supreme sacrifice throughout our history so we can enjoy the freedoms we have. Hopefully, we will see you sometime soon. God bless and be safe.
Thank you, Rosa. The next lady I wish to introduce and take a moment to say I've literally have known her since she was born. Michelle Arsenault, Michelle DiLorenzo, her father made the mistake of hiring me 13 years ago, when I was 13 years old, at the gas station next to the car wash at the shopping center. I say he only regrets it because I think I cost more than I made him while I worked there. She has spent 40 years and now a life member of the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad. Both Michelle and her husband have been giving back to the community for decades. And it is with pleasure that I introduce Michelle Arsenault, a former president, now board member of the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad.
And here we are, Memorial Day 2020, an interesting year thus far. A year of census taking, a year of repeated history, a year of fear, of not knowing, months of staying at home to stay safe, a time forcing us to stop and listen, a time of honoring. Oh, say can you see, a year of remembering, for so proudly we hail a thankful nation. We the people have the strength of broad stripes and bright stars, the perseverance for a perilous fight, the caring that streams and the giving that bursts, and a remembering that reflects with honor and appreciation that that flag will always still be there. In it together, the flag yet waves, respecting above all the freedom remembered because of the brave. We live in a fortunate community here in Laurel. Despite the current social circumstances, our city's safety community, led by a determined mayor, were able to continue our annual gathering for remembrance today. And so we at the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad wish upon you, virtually, a day of honor and a balance of this year with good remembrances. Happy Memorial Day.
And always, as the case at this traditional ceremony, it would not be right without having a representative of the Armed Forces of the United States. We're very fortunate in Laurel that American Legion Post 60 has been part of this community family for many, many decades. And many, many people, because of our proximity to Fort Meade, have had the military's presence here since the early 1900s. This lady has been here with us. I believe this will be her 11th year as commander of American Legion Post 60, a member of the United States Army who served in Vietnam. It is a pleasure to introduce Commander Lee Luby.
Good morning. The fallen heroes from American Legion Post 60 for the year 2019 and 2020 are from the Legionnaires, John Whitehead, Norman Sakarowski, James Phelps, Thomas Bod, Thomas Wilbur, Giles Mills, and William Stoner Sr. From the Sons of the American Legion, Ronald Hunkeler and Richard Davis. From the Unit 60 Auxiliary, Irene Lefevre. We're here today to celebrate Memorial Day, but it could be better said, lest we forget. If you are here today as a veteran who served this country, you are to be commended. Thank you for your service and for the sacrifices you made in service to your country. But it is not about those of us who are here. Today is about those of us who served this nation and made the supreme sacrifice to their country. The American military has served this country for more than 240 years. That service can never be understated or repaid. That service has stretched from the American Revolution in 1775 to current service in more than 130 countries around the world today. And to this day, Americans continue to die on foreign soil. Sadly, none of the men and women who have died in service to this nation can be replaced. There have been more than 1 million of them. But their sacrifices must be remembered and honored. The Americans who have lost their lives have not done so in vain, but for a bigger and more noble cause, not only to America, but to the world. We need to be thankful for their service, but there is something else we need to realize. We have a responsibility to carry on, preserve, and protect this country. I hope that all of you have a safe and happy Memorial Day. Things are improving and we will be better and stronger when we get through this national emergency. But for Memorial Day 2020, we will remember, honor, and be eternally grateful for those service personnel who have lost their life protecting us.
I'm doing this so I can totally embarrass him. But we normally have singers who are part of this program, but because of the uniqueness of this virtual presentation of Memorial Day service, we have the technical staff from the Laurel Cable Network. And this fine gentleman is responsible for the music that you're hearing. And he's one of 3 that are here right now, plus a crew, I'm sure, back in the studio. And later today, this film will be edited again, and you will see the individual presentations at each memorial that occurred earlier this morning so that it can be assembled all into one presentation. But what we're about to hear is a selection of God Bless America. Following that, our Laurel Volunteer Fire Department Honor Guard will be the ringing of the bells 555. Followed that, retired Colonel Robert Kiker, retired from the Prince George County Sheriff's Department, who's been here as many years as some of us, to always come and play taps. And at the conclusion of taps, I'll be happy to come back and make a few comments. We'll have our benediction by our new chaplain and a prayer and some closing remarks. You're on, young man.
Order!
I'd like to reintroduce our new chaplain, Jim Collins. I'd like to thank him for stepping up and accepting this. He said last week on a conference call, he felt he had a huge pair of shoes to fill, and I think he's done just fine. And all of us know that Halbert, if he were here, would thank him personally for being what he is, a volunteer who stepped up when it was time. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Collins.
Thank you. Before I get into the benediction, I would like to say this. I'm so proud of the Laurel Volunteer Fire Department, the Laurel Rescue Squad, the Laurel Police Department, the American Legion, and the City of Laurel. I've been part of just about all those organizations, starting with the fire department for 48 years. I worked the police department at City Hall for 38 years. I'm a member of the American Legion Post 60. I have numerous friends that I consider family with the Laurel Volunteer Rescue Squad. Also, I'd like to say about our honor guard. They don't only perform here, they perform across the county. They've been asked at various fire departments because they're good at what they do, and I really appreciate everything they've done. To the chaplain, Warren Litchfield, you'll always be in our hearts and prayers. You're always going to be there, and I look for your advice, and I'm sure you're going to give it to me. But we talk about Halbert, our chaplain, being chaplain for so many years, but he also had a sense of humor. I remember in a church when he was being presented as a minister, it was a church in Howard County in the summer with no air conditioning. And I remember sweating, and I looked at the chaplain and I said, "It's hot in here." And he said, "That's just a sample of what you'll get if you don't straighten up." That's our chaplain. As the Memorial Day ceremony ends and we return to our various departments, to answer the many calls that we receive, we ask you, God, to be with us, protect and watch over us, and guide us to make the right decisions for all of the victims of fire, medical, law enforcement, and military issues. We ask that you keep all of the servants safe in your arms. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
So, in closing remarks, the editorial comments that I usually make at this point, if you have to take the social media, you can direct them straight to me, because Halbert Litchfield said, when you close out the ceremonies, just do what you always do, keep talking, because you never shut up anyway. So let me just say there's common denominators during this process we have to remember. The common denominator is simply this: we are all human beings. And to the best of my knowledge, I haven't, nor has anybody else listening to this broadcast, met a perfect human being. Right now, there's a lot of tense feelings, a lot of insomnia, a lot of nerves, because every hour during this pandemic, we don't know what it brings. It's interesting because it's been dubbed a war. It's not a war as we know it. This is an enemy you can't even see. This is an enemy that's around corners or behind a wall, but you don't know that. There's a lot of controversy about how serious this is and why are we being forced to stay in or not shop at our favorite store. There was a French historian by the name of Voltaire who said, or attributed to him, there's a lot of argument about Voltaire these days, but basically, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, "I wholly disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." In other words, our First Amendment of freedom of speech entitles every one of us to have an opinion. And it's an opinion you should express. But when you're expressing it, expressing those feelings and those needs, you need to remember one more thing. We're still all human beings. We're imperfect in every way you can imagine. It doesn't make any difference what religion, nationality, color of your skin, whatever. This is an enemy that comes quick, swift, and we all have to do our part. So when you disagree with a policy and or procedure, please, people gave their lives up in order for you to have the ability in this country to express that opinion. But when it gets to the point where we go past logic and intelligence, respect for one another, and turns to name calling and any other negative thing you can think of, then you need to just agree to disagree and say goodbye. I told you I have a son in this, and I have a very dear niece who is a nurse working at the Veterans Hospital in Baltimore. If you can imagine veterans of our armed forces in a hospital, a veterans hospital, and not only did they sacrifice, and no, they didn't make the ultimate sacrifice on a battlefield or on a ship or on an airplane, but they're dying by themselves. So when you think about that beach, the picnic, it's not necessary to be, and I'm not even remotely suggesting that you find this a depressing holiday. It's a holiday of joy to celebrate the people who have made those sacrifices. And you know what? They were all human beings, some male, some female, but they gave it their all. And just like these organizations that stand up here today, many people will never see a policeman at the door or an EMS and an ambulance in front of their house or a fire truck because their house is on fire. We take them for granted sometimes too much. 9/11, when this country was attacked on its old shores in New York, and we watched thousands of people die from two planes going in to the Twin Towers. And another plane where a group of heroes tried to save themselves and that plane, but were willing to die in a field in Pennsylvania that the third plane didn't make it to its destination. Think about those people today, because the only thing I ask of anybody, take the time. If you believe in God, say a prayer. If you don't believe in God, that's fine. Again, that's a freedom we enjoy in this country. But what you could do is just take a moment, take a deep breath, forget the inconvenience what today brings us, and let's just remember we're all human beings. This is a battle we will win. As Commander Luby said, you know, it is sacrifice that we have seen many times before in this country. But because we unite when we're challenged the most, we will succeed in defeating this virus. But what we need to do today is learn to live, enjoy, appreciate one another, take care of our families, our friends, our co-workers, and anybody else that plays a part in your life, because you only get one of them. And so if you see people today, even with your mask on, it's not that hard to just say thank you and have a great day and have a safe holiday. Two last points. I don't know what the issue is about wearing a mask, because if you really think about it, growing up in this country, everybody wore a mask on Halloween. Everybody enjoyed wearing a mask when they were a child. This is for your safety. It's not for fun. And last but not least, and I just have to say this, as a person who has to go to work every day, those white signs on every city, county, state, and federal highway in this country, it's a speed sign, and it's against the law. Because I'll tell you what's even more tragic to think about is many of these first responders are risking their lives while other people are on the highway at unbelievably great speeds over those limits because traffic is so limited. And this is a holiday that always talks about the number of accidents 3 days after the fact. Well, there's not a lot of people traveling this year for obvious reasons, but that's not a good reason to hurt yourself or somebody simply driving. God bless all of you and God bless the United States. Thank you all for tuning in today. And remember, thank you is the easiest thing to say. Have a great day.